Hi, I'd very much like to welcome you to this year's annual CHASM Conference. I am Andy Limer, the Director of the Research Centre here at the University of Birmingham. Like much of the rest of the world, we've gone online for our conference for the first time this year. We really hope you like this as a new format for us. This year is also a special year for CHASM. It's 10 years since we were set up as a research centre at the University of Birmingham, where we started to look at all aspects of personal financial well-being, seeking to bring academically rigorous, timely and relevant research to bear on this important topic. However, we decided for our anniversary conference, being held at such a challenging time economically, socially and related to our physical and mental health as a nation, then rather than look back at what's been achieved over the last 10 years, we'd instead use this as an opportunity to look forward to what continues to need to be done, as sadly too many of the issues that we were set up to address continue to be key social policy issues and practical economic challenges for both the United Kingdom and the wider world. This is of course being brought into really stark focus by the COVID-19 pandemic at the moment. The title of our event, therefore, today is Financial Wellbeing, Risk and Reward in a Contemporary Society. To help us explore this topic today, we have three speakers who we've asked to talk about where, as a researching and research-using community, we should be looking to put our efforts to be engaged over the next 10 years or so to address the challenges that CHASM was set up to look at. We have three keynote speakers making up today's conference. In a moment, we will introduce the first of those speakers, Danielle Walker Palmour, the Director of the Friends Provident Society, a key funder of research in CHASM's area of interest, who's going to talk to us about the work that her foundation is doing on the development of economic resilience, both at the individual and at community levels. This afternoon we'll then hand over firstly to the Lord Bishop of Birmingham, the Very Reverend David Urquhart. He will talk to us about economic value and social values, how we form them as a society, how we develop them and how we should look to reward them. Our third speaker is Professor Tom Shapiro. He's the Director of the Institute of Assets and Social Policy at Brandeis University in the United States of America. He will talk to us about racial wealth inequality and what could be done to address this widening gap in the developed world between white and others' shares of wealth, an area that he's been researching throughout his distinguished academic career and that is particularly, of course, very rightly again in the public eye at the current time. After each of the speakers, who have kindly pre-recorded their talks for us today, there's going to be a live session for us to be able to engage with them, to ask questions and receive answers from each of the speakers that we'd very much like to welcome you to participate in. If you haven't already received the invites to these Zoom-based sessions, please just drop an email to Helen Harris at h.m.a.harris@birmingham.ac.uk and she will email you those details for the session so that you can join in and participate in those discussions. My CHASM colleague, Professor Karen Rowlingson, will now introduce our first speaker for today, Danielle Walker Palmour. Thank you very much, Karen.
Hello, I'm Karen Rowlingson, Professor of Social Policy at the University of Birmingham and former Director of CHASM. It's my great pleasure to introduce Danielle Walker Palmour to talk to us about economic resilience. Danielle has been the Director of the Friends Provident Foundation since 2004, and she has held a variety of roles in an executive, non-executive and advisory capacity over the years for government and non-government organisations like the Treasury, Cabinet Office, the Commission for Racial Equality, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and Big Society Capital, to name just a few. The issue of economic resilience could not be more important than it is today, when we're still struggling to work out the ramifications of COVID-19 on our economy. Danielle will not just talk about the topic from a narrow economic perspective, but looking at more broader issues like the environmental sustainability issue that we have and individual well-being. Given Danielle's experience, expertise and insight, I have no doubt that we will have a very thought-provoking and informative presentation. So over to you, Danielle.
Hello, I'm Danielle Walker Palmour and I'm the Director of Friends Provident Foundation. Friends Provident Foundation is a supporter of CHASM and we're delighted to take part in this online conference. Friends Provident Foundation makes grants, uses its investments and its staff to pursue its mission. We call ourselves a capitalized charity rather than a grant maker. Our current program is focused on how the economy can serve society better. Trustees' analysis is that the economy produces a range of outputs that society finds incredibly useful. Growth, jobs, wealth, goods and services that we all use and consume. It also drives outcomes that the state and the voluntary sector and individuals spend quite a lot of time putting right. Inequality, environmental degradation, soil erosion, poor health, to name just a few. A central question we are trying to address through our work is whether there's always a trade-off between the goods and services and the good things that the economy produces and the more negative outcomes. Does that always have to be a set of choices? The original title for our work on the economy that we established in 2012 was Resilient Economies, because at that point we were very much in recovery from the economic downturn of 2008-9, and resilience and resistance to shocks and protecting society and the most vulnerable in society from those shocks seemed to be an important objective. When we reviewed the program in 2018, we found that resilience didn't really resonate with grant holders, with applicants, and with audiences we were attempting to reach. And so we very much listened to that and reframed the program as focused more on building and framing the economy, how we understand it, and how we create something better, as opposed to a more defensive stance in terms of resilience. However, I think the coronavirus pandemic has very much raised the question of resilience again. And our ability to withstand shocks and adapt feels very much to the fore. Central questions which are, I think, exercising us all now are: what does a resilient economy that's responsive to society's needs within environmental limits look like? Secondly, what can we understand about how systems change and adapt and bring that into the analysis? And thirdly, what does personal and household well-being look like within the context of a broader look at society and the economy? What I'm hoping to do today is to walk you through some of the insights that arose from our 2012 efforts, as well as the framing that we've developed and insights we've got from our program to date. And hopefully also bring in some of the ideas around well-being that we found useful. So first of all, resilience. What does a resilient economy look like? When the foundation was putting together its program in 2012, we asked the New Economics Foundation to look at their long-standing programs, working with communities on economic issues, and give us some insights as to, from that body of work, what would the characteristics of a more resilient economy be? The report they created for us was called Mapping Economic Resilience, and it was led by a team of a range of people across NEF, spearheaded by Tony Greenham. In terms of how the foundation perceives the economy, obviously the economy operates at a range of levels. At the very high level, it's about the system whereby we exchange goods and services, monetary system, legislation, and a system of regulation. But in terms of how we experience the economy, it's very much at a local level. And so it felt really important to understand how people thought about what resilience might look like at a local level, and how we try to effect those changes to bring about whatever those characteristics are. So the following is an amalgam of observations from the NEF program over the years about economic resilience at a local level. So what was particularly useful about NEF at the time was that they created a framework called A More Resilient Economy, and it had a number of key characteristics. The characteristics that NEF came up with are here on this slide. First of all, a more resilient economy at the local level produces goods and services at the right scale. So not too much, not too little. It's very much about trying to create the right amount of goods and services that are an appropriate sort of thing for a local community. So we don't want scarcity, and we also don't want overproduction. Secondly, it adapts to climate change in terms of reducing the reliance on fossil fuels, because it's certainly understood that they are not a sustainable fuel for the long term, and a community, if it is to be resilient, should reduce its dependence upon it. It also supports investment in social as well as financial capital, which essentially allows the community to address poverty. So community energy projects, which might both have an asset for the community, as well as address poverty and fuel poverty in the community, is a great example. But it's very much about trying to engage people in the process of solving their own problems. It also supports individuals and groups to experiment and develop and strengthen their skills. So that's through learning, through self-organizing, etc. And it also includes structures, enterprises and public organizations that support people to live lives which bring them some well-being, which give them some sense of efficacy. So what does all of this mean in terms of well-being at the personal and household level? What does resilience and adaptation, how does it play out in terms of the individual? We found in the report that the New Economics Foundation did for us on mapping local economic resilience, that there was a helpful model of well-being included in that, which I will hopefully share with you. We found this was a really helpful model if you add a further dimension, which is a framing around the edges, perhaps, which is within environmental limitations, because everything needs to be operate within that context for us to all have well-being. So this is dynamic model, which shows that the relationships between personal resources, external factors, how one feels on a day-to-day basis, as well as the good functioning and satisfaction of needs, including the need to engage with our external environment, our communities, and to feel useful and engaged in an activity. So the work that we undertake is focused very much on the external conditions part of that element, material conditions, the economy, your work, income levels, that kind of thing. And financial health and health itself also sits in the personal resources side, and that has to do with your mental health as well. So the work of CHASM and the Friends Provident Foundation both sit within this model, mostly around external conditions, but the importance of seeing how these things feed into our sense of well-being and how effective our personal sense of efficacy, how effective we feel we are in carrying out and meeting our own needs, I think is well depicted here. So I think CHASM's work very much straddles the personal issues and the financial side, as does ours. These realms do shrink and grow depending on the individual and the context. But I think the most important thing I would pull out of this model for well-being is the opportunity to develop and access activity that we feel is central to our own sense of worth, that we're actually contributing something, that we are putting something into the world, perhaps, that is in some way helpful to someone, be that a caring activity, be that through our paid work, through our community activity. And I think perhaps just as a possible observation is that COVID-19 has perhaps given us a better sense of what those things are than we had before the crisis. I think if I was going to critique this model from a perspective of now, I might say that it does slightly underplay the importance of negative external factors, such as systems of discrimination, and in some ways some markets which are not functioning well, which systematically have rules, appear to have rules which work against certain types of people, and certain people actually do have consistently poor outcomes as a consequence. It is really addressing this particular gap that both Friends Provident Foundation and CHASM are active, and it is the framing of our work going forward. Thank you.